One of Canada's newest senators is calling on her fellow senators to look into the forced sterilization of Indigenous women across Canada. Yvonne Boyer was named to represent Ontario in the Senate just this March. She's Métis, and she has a background in nursing and in law, and she's studied and published extensively on the issue of Indigenous health. And she's taking up the issue of Indigenous women across the country who say they were forced or not properly consulted about their decision to undergo medical sterilization. Senator Boyer joins me now from her car near Smith Falls, Ontario. Senator Boyer, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
I guess the big question is, how did you find yourself, how did you get involved in this issue?
Well, I first saw the issue back in 2015 when the Saskatoon Star Phoenix reporter Betty Ann Adam contacted me and asked me if I would have any comments on two women that had come to her that said that they had been recently sterilized in one of the Saskatoon hospitals. They were both Indigenous.
Why were they contacting you? Why did your name come up?
Well, Betty Ann had known me for speaking about various issues dealing with Indigenous health previous to that. So that's probably why she had contacted me.
Okay.
So I had, at that time, I said that it's very brave of those women to come forward. That was Brenda Pelche and Tracy Benab. And they were the first women to come forward talking about how they had been sterilized in a Saskatoon hospital.
Okay, now what were their stories? Sorry, I don't mean to. What were their stories? What came up? What's their?
Well, Brenda was on the operating room table, and she had signed the consent form, but she had revoked her consent on the table and said, "I do not want this done." The doctor looked at the nurse and said, "Did she sign the consent form?" And she had signed it, but the doctor went ahead anyway and sterilized her when she was saying that she did not want to be sterilized.
Okay.
So that was Brenda's story. There was many issues there that I had spoke to Betty Ann Adam about, and that would be free, prior, and informed consent, and that she had clearly revoked her consent on the table, and the doctor went ahead and actually sterilized her at that time.
Now, you are aware of other cases, because you're calling for a look into this across Canada. You're aware of other cases. How many cases, or what kind of cases are coming to light, or do you have knowledge of?
Well, I'll just carry on from where I had started. Sure. With Betty Ann Adam, and she had Betty Ann brought to light the very first women that had been sterilized. After Brenda and Tracy came forward, there were other women that came forward, and then other women and other women that came forward. And pretty soon there was several women that had been in the media talking about how the Saskatoon Health Authority had actually sterilized and coerced them into sterilization. So in October 2016, the Saskatoon Health Region contacted me and asked me if I would do an external review on their practices in the hospital, and that was very brave of them as well. I did do a report. I did do some research with Dr. Judy Bartlett. We interviewed several women. We started in October, and I believe we finished in about March the next year, and we had advertised in the area, looking at the catchment area of the Saskatoon Health Region, and spoke to many women. Many women came forward. We put posters out in the catchment area in north of Saskatoon, and many women had come forward at that time. The criteria was very narrow. It was for women that had been sterilized at a Saskatoon hospital that had just given birth by cesarean section. So the criteria was very narrow, and we spoke with, we did 6 face-to-face interviews and 1 interview by telephone. There was 16 or 17 women that came forward at that time that we, for various reasons that would be expected, because it was such a traumatic experience, they couldn't follow through with the actual interview themselves. So they tried and they couldn't. But we did interview six people, 6 women that had been sterilized. Since that time, the report came out in July 2017. Since that time, there's been quite a bit of, there's been several people that have contacted me outside of the Saskatoon Health Region, namely in Manitoba, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, have contacted me that have been sterilized or coerced into sterilization, that is indicating to me that it is cross country. It's a national issue.
Okay, one of the questions I have, one of the questions that comes to mind, obviously, is what do these cases have in common? Is it complete lack of consent? Is it coercion? Is it not knowing one's alternative? How would you describe a common thread in these cases?
Well, the common threads are all of these women are Indigenous, for one thing. Mm-hmm. Some of them believed that it was not a permanent procedure. Some of them had given consent, revoked it, and others had not consented at all. So it's a variety of what the consent is, but one of the main issues is consent. That's a fact.
I guess one of the other questions that comes to mind is, are these recent cases? In other words, is this still happening today? How recently are these incidents happening?
This was 2015. The Saskatoon Health Region changed their policy in 2015, and at that time, they revised the policy so that I don't think there's been any more of those issues happening in Saskatoon. But if it was happening in Saskatoon, it was happening elsewhere too. And Saskatoon is not an isolated area for it to happen. I believe that wherever there's been a high Indigenous population, you will probably see the same thing.
Okay, the other question is, you say the Saskatoon Health Authority revised its policy. Revised it from what to what?
Well, they had a good look. They were concerned too. Rightfully so. They were concerned about what was going on, and you would have to have a look at their policies. I just can't recall off the top of my head.
But what is it?
But they good look at it.
Okay, but what was it in their policy? This is what people want to know. What was it in their policy, or in any hospital's policy, that would allow people to do this against or without the prior and full consent of a woman?
I don't believe that within the policy it dealt with that, but their policies on tubal ligations is what they were looking at. Yeah. So and you would have to pull up the policies and see. Every hospital has policies on it, but some of them are probably outline a little closer on what tubal ligation, what steps have to be taken when tubal ligations are offered. And so there's probably a whole checklist that would be available.
Okay, so I mentioned you are relatively new to the Red Chamber, the upper chamber of Canada. You named in March. You're asking your fellow senators to, I don't know, strike a committee or look into this, start an investigation of this. What would you hope, or how would you hope to go about that? What would you hope it would do?
Well, I brought this issue up in my first speech on September 27th. It's an issue that I feel very strongly about. I would like to see the Senate study it, but not just the Senate. I think the Senate is only one tool. I think that Amnesty International is calling for a central person, like an ombudsperson, to look at these issues, and I think that that's a really good idea. And I think the issue of having that person as an Indigenous person that understands the colonization process that these women have gone through and what their health requirements are would be a very important stepping stone into documenting data and doing some research on how widespread this issue is. I think we need to get the evidence, find the evidence, and it's not just up to the Senate. It's up to the government to look at their policies. It's up to the government to make some changes in addressing and putting together an action plan that's really going to look at these issues and stop this practice.
Okay, a last question, because you've been very patient with us, and I know you're speaking to us from your car, but I guess one of the mind-boggling questions is, why is this happening?
Why is this happening? Well, there's many reasons for this to happen. Historically, there are lots of historical reasons. Eugenics were popular in the 20s and 30s, the legislation of eugenics. The whole colonization process within Canada that has left Indigenous women in very much of a vulnerable position, and how the healthcare system is not indigenized. It is many of the healthcare policies that we are looking at today have an underpinning of the guardian and ward theory. This is what we're seeing in hospital policy. People, health professionals saying they know what's best for Indigenous women, and that's what we see in, reflected in the policies. The policies, the structure needs to be looked at as to how we can create a new structure that's actually going to work for Indigenous people in this country.
Okay, well, Senator Boyer, I want to thank you very much for taking the time, and this is an issue we will follow without doubt. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.